The Chinese impression is that they are willing to at least negotiate, not necessarily on Donald Trump's terms, but to talk. But their impression is that the U.S. has not opened channels and not made an effort to open up channels.
Imagine the heart of American industry stops beating. Detroit, the city where automotive legends were once born, is now shrouded in silence. Conveyors are stopped. People in uniforms stand silently, unable to believe their eyes. It's not war, not a pandemic, not a natural disaster. It's a decision made by the company itself, General Motors. The industry leader, a symbol of American quality, has simply turned off the lights in its own factories.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
But this is not just a corporate decision. It is a shockwave that has swept across the country. More than 10,000 workers in Canada, Mexico, and the US have been left without a source of income. And while GM's top managers talk nicely about moving into the electric future, thousands of families are facing reality: loans, mortgages, children who will no longer be able to go to college. This is not reform, it is a reboot with human casualties.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is to have them come into the country.
The higher the tariff, the more you're going to put on the value of that piece, those goods, the higher people are going to pay in shops.
Amid the panic, he appears. Donald Trump. His voice is not just a statement, but a hammer blow. He calls GM traitors and promises to impose a 25% tariff on every car manufactured outside the US. And this time, there will be no exceptions. His new economic war has already begun. And the first shots were fired right here at the closed factories of American auto giants.
Surveys like the Michigan survey, consumer sentiment, and it's a really worrying number because at some point these sentiment surveys feed into hard data of real consumer spending, and we know this from history and precedent. That's what happens. So when we see a number as bad as this one, it is only a matter of time, unless anything else changes that would suddenly make people more cheerful. Look at that chart. I mean, just look at it. Unless people suddenly become more cheerful, why would this not translate into spending? You see, that consumer lab, that lab from Yale, that number of 4,700, that is providing you don't start substituting goods.
But if you think this is just an internal struggle, you are mistaken. In London, environmental standards are being urgently revised. In Brussels, urgent consultations are underway. South Korea and Japan are halting export deals. Because GM's decision and Trump's response are no longer economic news, they are a geopolitical storm. And all this is happening against the backdrop of a global supply crisis, rising prices, and the complete collapse of logistics.
In other words, pre-substitution, if we just continue as we are now. But of course, people will start to substitute. They will find other goods. And as the Christmas Tree Association said a moment or two ago, it's going to be very difficult to find substitution of many things that we currently get from China.
Now think about this. What if all this is not accidental? What if GM deliberately entered into this conflict in order to survive in a world where electric cars require not steel and coal, but lithium and cobalt from the Congo and Chile? Where the logic of America first does not work because the elements of the future are simply not mined on American soil.
Well, when you look at the kind of input Musk has been having into politics, there has been some polling done which suggests there is a strong dissatisfaction with...
Is this a betrayal of national interests? Or an attempt to survive in a changed reality? Emergency meetings are being held in the White House. Panic reigns on Wall Street. GM shares are losing billions. And workers on the ground are losing more than just their jobs. They are losing their faith. Because today, it's not just about factories. It's about who we are as a country. It's about what it means to be part of the great American dream. Are you ready to find out why one corporate decision could change the course of history? Why General Motors could become either the flagship of a new era or the symbol of the collapse of an entire era? Then watch until the end.
Yeah, you'll be surprised just how much we get exclusively from China. And Jim, I'm really curious to get your perspective on the White House's handling of this situation. Not so much the tariffs that have been announced, but this reporting that the White House, that officials have made clear to Beijing that they want Xi to ask for a call with Trump.
At dawn, everything looked normal. It was a typical morning in Detroit, the roar of engines, the clang of metal, the blaring of shift bells. But by 9 a.m., an oppressive silence had fallen over the GM plant. The lines had stopped. The monitors were blank. People stood at their workstations, waiting for someone to explain why everything had stopped. An engineer in a blue jumpsuit was the first to break the silence. "It's not a breakdown." His voice trembled. A minute later, managers came out onto the floor, confused, their eyes already reflecting the disaster. The head office sent a short message: production halted until further notice. This was not a temporary glitch. This was the beginning.
Right now, 145 going up against 125. These are the tariffs between the world's two biggest economies.
And here's another number, 4,700, or about $400 per month. That is how much more money Yale's now estimating, the Yale Budget Lab, that President Trump's tariffs are going to cost average households each year. And with just hours left in trading, the Dow right now.
Within hours, the news spread across the country. General Motors, America's largest automaker, had officially announced the suspension of production at several plants. The official reason was the transition to a new stage in the development of electric vehicles, the so-called deep transformation phase. But behind the scenes, the tone was much harsher. One anonymous source on the board of directors told reporters, "We are losing control. Competition with Chinese and Korean brands is getting out of hand. We need to urgently restructure the entire supply chain, otherwise we will collapse." On the same day, electric van assembly was halted at the CMI plant in Ontario, and more than 1,200 workers were sent home with no promise of return. A few hours later, the famous Factory Zero in Michigan, a symbol of hope for a green revolution, fell silent. Nearly 200 people lost their jobs in front of their families. It was announced that this was only a temporary pause for retooling for the new Ultium platform. But managers familiar with the plans knew that only one of the 3 shifts would return. More than 500 jobs would be lost forever. This was not a repair. It was the dismantling of an old era.
We shouldn't be surprised with all that's coming out and all the worries about tariffs. It's not just that, it's the complexity of everything else as well. The changes within the federal government, the worries about job losses, the worries about a slowing economy, higher inflation, and eventually you get these...
Against this backdrop, leaks about the real reasons for the shutdown began to filter into the press. It turned out that GM's internal reports predicted a sharp collapse in demand for electric vehicles in the US amid a new wave of inflation and consumer discontent over rising prices. One document, which was allegedly leaked to the editorial office of a major business publication, contained alarming figures. Over the past 3 months, but internal EV sales had fallen by 26%, while the cost of storing unsold cars had risen by $300 million. In some states, dealers refused to accept new deliveries. In Indiana, one car dealership openly displayed 43 unsold electric crossovers with a sign saying, "Nobody wants to buy them. Want one? Take it at a discount." This was not a logistics failure. It was market rejection.
But it's also an opening to say, okay, we're capping this for now, and that perhaps offers a way forward that we could begin talking about how to bring these down.
And all this was happening against a backdrop of uncertainty at the heart of the company. One of Mary Barra's deputies, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that top managers had begun to argue about whether to maintain the company's presence in the US market in its current form. The Eclipse plan was being considered a program to partially relocate production capacity abroad, including to Singapore and Uzbekistan, but where negotiations were allegedly already underway to build hybrid platforms. This plan, which has not been officially confirmed, caused panic in some circles, especially among auto industry unions. Their representatives demanded immediate clarification, threatening to blockade all remaining GM sites in the US and Canada.
Lived in China. You've covered China for some time now. As we're looking at this question of who's going to blink first, with two very different political systems, what is your gauge on this?
Well, different systems, listen, one's a democracy, one is not. One's a single-party state, very much not a democracy. But China does have politics, and Chinese leaders do not want to be seen, we were talking about this yesterday, I believe, do not want to be seen as capitulating to America. That is not good politics for a Chinese leader.
But the most shocking thing was that GM decided to launch a series of automatic layoffs through an internal AI system. The program, called Layoff Matrix, analyzed employee performance, loyalty, and seniority, assigning each employee a future value rating. Employees did not even receive a live notification their passes simply stopped working. One such case occurred in Milwaukee, where a factory security guard refused to let in a shift of 46 people, explaining that according to the list, they no longer exist. The workers, many of whom had 20 years of service, staged a picket line right at the gate. 3 hours later, they were dispersed by the police.
To allow that. So now you have the U.S. president say, well, I'm not going to open those channels. China has to open them first. It's kind of ridiculous at the end of the day, because you are playing with the interests of American consumers, Chinese consumers, etc. The other point I would make about China's reaction today in not quite meeting the U.S. tariffs, 145%, U.S.-China goes to 125. And in Xi's statement, he says, we're going to 125 in response. That's as high as we're going because this is getting a little ridiculous, right? And that's both a signal to say we're not going to get caught up in this tit for tat to the degree that the president is.
Meanwhile, the information space exploded. National media, independent bloggers, economic observers, everyone was discussing what was really going on. Some talked about GM's attempt to buy time before a series of supplier bankruptcies. Others claimed that this was preparation for a merger with one of the Chinese companies allegedly buyed. Some even hinted at the possibility of special services interfering in the corporation's affairs, and the coincidence of the plant closures and the failure of negotiations on government contracts for EV technology for the Pentagon was too sudden.
Up. You're seeing that swing here going into the afternoon, up almost 650 points. But it was up and down there throughout earlier in the day. With us now, we have CNN business editor-at-large Richard Quest. We have CNN chief national security analyst Jim Sciutto as well. Richard, a key economic gauge, the consumer sentiment now at its second lowest level on record, going back to 1952. Why?
While the public tried to comprehend the scale of what was happening, Mary Barra remained silent. Her official press release was cold and formal. GM is preparing for the next phase of automotive evolution. We are confident that these temporary challenges will result in long-term success. But in the workplaces, in families, in small towns whose economies were built around a single plant, no one felt any confidence or hope for the future. People were losing everything. One morning, their jobs. A month later, their homes. 2 months later, their sense of stability and faith in the future. And it was at this moment, when the American dream cracked under the hood of an electric car, that Donald Trump entered the scene. But more on that later.
Well, if they did fall on deaf ears, but it's just the latest example in the really day by day, the deepening trade war that is underway between the United States and China. Yes, we are learning that U.S. officials privately behind the scenes urged China to not retaliate. In fact, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been saying that publicly all along, warning countries to not retaliate. Well, those warnings have fallen on deaf ears, particularly with China, as they raised their tariffs to 125%. The question now is which side is going to blink?
When news of GM's mass production stoppage reached Washington, everything changed within 24 hours. Trump didn't just react, he put on a political show in the best tradition of his campaign. From the podium in Tulsa, in front of a jubilant crowd, he lashed out at General Motors with such force that even skeptics gasped. He called what was happening a stab in the back of the working class, betrayal for profit, and a disgrace that America will not forgive. Within an hour of his speech, an urgent statement appeared on the White House website. A A 25% tariff would be imposed on all cars and parts manufactured outside the US, regardless of brand. It was specified that the tariffs would take effect immediately, with no transition periods and no exceptions.
Including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs. ABC's chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce leading us off.
Today, President Trump side by side in the Oval Office with the head of the Irish government.
GM found itself in a trap. Having embarked on a course of electrification and global optimization, the company literally crashed into a concrete wall built by the new US trade policy. And when CEO Mary Barra arrived at the White House for a closed-door meeting with Trump's advisors, the negotiations were tough and tense. One participant, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that Trump literally interrupted Barra after every other sentence. He demanded that production be returned to the US here and now, threatening new fines and a complete block on government support. In response, Barra presented documents, delivery schedules, logistics maps, contracts for cobalt from the Congo, lithium from Bolivia, and graphene from China. "We have nothing to build cars here," she said. This moment became symbolic. Two worlds, political and industrial, collided at a point of no return. GM really can't turn the world upside down overnight. Manufacturing electric cars is not just a matter of changing the engine. It requires new infrastructure, new suppliers, and new laws. Yes, the company is building gigafactories in Nevada, Tennessee, and Michigan, but they are not scheduled to be completed until 2026 to 2027. Until then, production will remain dependent on global supply chains that are being destroyed with every new tweet from the White House. Some projects, according to sources within GM, have already been frozen. A $3.2 billion investment planned for the development of the Ultium platform has been put on hold. Contracts with 2 Indian battery manufacturers have been terminated. And 14,000 unfinished car bodies are sitting idle in a warehouse in Texas due to a shortage of battery supplies from South Korea, and which have been delayed by new customs checks. But behind all the technical and political rhetoric, the human dimension of the crisis is being lost. Across the country, families dependent on the auto industry are in shock. In Ohio, a single mother who worked in logistics at GM sold her home to pay for her son's medical surgery after losing her insurance. In Tennessee, 2 employees who were laid off after the assembly line was shut down went on a hunger strike outside Nashville City Hall, demanding their jobs back or compensation. In Michigan, a veteran factory worker who had worked on the same line for 27 years committed suicide, leaving a note that read, "I don't know who I am without this job." Local businesses are suffering just as much. Restaurants, car washes, cafes, and shops near the plants are empty. In one town near Detroit, where almost half of households were connected to GM, the school district announced the temporary closure of 3 schools. Parents simply cannot pay for food, extracurricular activities, and transportation. The pastor of one of the local churches admitted that the number of requests for food aid had increased 6-fold. This is not just an economic crisis, it is an identity crisis. People who considered themselves part of a great industrial organism found themselves nobody in a matter of days. And all this is happening in the context of an information war. There is a real battle for narrative on social media, on television, and in news digests. Trump accuses GM of betrayal, GM accuses Trump of sabotaging progress. Some say that the company has gone global and forgotten its roots. Others argue that political vindictiveness is destroying the country's competitiveness. But the truth is that the situation is out of control. Every new measure, every new tariff has a domino effect. More than 12 bills related to subsidies, tariffs, and the protection of domestic production are already under consideration in Congress. One of them proposes linking tax breaks to the percentage of American components in each car. Another proposes fining companies that cut jobs in the US. Amid all this instability, GM's shares fell again, reaching their lowest level in 12 years. Moody's revised the company's credit rating from stable to negative outlook. Investors do not believe in a quick recovery. But most importantly, the people are losing confidence. People no longer know who to believe: the government, which promises to restore greatness, or companies that claim that without international cooperation, the country has no future. And in this whirlwind of fear, panic, and politics, the main question arises: if not GM, then who? If not America, then where will the future of cars be built? Perhaps we are witnessing not just a transformation of the industry. Perhaps we are witnessing the end of old industrial America, the America where people and factories were one, the America where the word work meant security. Now all that remains of that security are empty parking lots, silent assembly lines, and unanswered questions that everyone seems to be running away from.